Again, so we're
on Shabbos, right?
we're learning the laws of Shabbos. And before we start the class, while I'm bringing up we're learning the laws, the next two chapters, the chapter that we started last week, and the one that follows deals with the laws of the Torah reading, and the next one, 79, I think, deals with the laws of the Haftorah. And then afterwards we get into the complicated laws of Shabbos. So we're kind of taking a little bit of a breather, and for the hard laws that we'll get into chapter, I think it's 80. The Tonight's class is, again, the whole class that we learn is sponsored by Barbara for the schus of her children, and tonight specifically was in honor of b'schus Rivka Esther Bas Leah Sarah for Zivik Tov and Brius Nechona Yashakoach to everyone. Okay, so let's continue with the laws over here. Let me just bring everything up. Okay, here we go. I believe we're holding law number 3, which is actually very much connected to this week's Torah reading. If everyone knows that this week's Torah reading is 2 parshas, we read the parsha of Tazria and Metzora. Both of them deal with leprosy. The first one deals mainly with leprosy, the plague, and the second one deals with the healing of it. But we read 2 parshas. So how do we read 2 parshas? So here the Shulchan Aruch tells us, Shabbos Shekorin Shtei Sidros. In this situation like this week, well, we're going to read 2 parshas. So if one pays attention now that we're learning the law, we're going to notice that Yesh Lichaber Hastaris Ima Oila Revi. Which aliyah means we call up. We learned before that the minimum amount on Shabbos is 7 people get called to the Torah. The 8th person is the one who gets the Haftorah. There is those who have the custom to have additional, if they need be, if there's a simcha or a bris or whatever, they need to give more people aliyahs, they add. But traditionally, some people, Chabad doesn't add, but some people do add. I've been to shuls where you could take an hour and a half to say kriya because they add so many aliyahs. But which aliyah is the aliyah that meets together the 2 parshas, right? So we don't finish one parsha, let's say, and then start the new aliyah with the second parsha. Every time we have 2 parshas, there's going to be one aliyah, one person who's called up. The aliyah means the person who's elevated, who's called to the Torah. That in that person's aliyah, that person's time that he's at the Torah, there's going to be the combination, the end of the first parsha and the beginning of the second parsha. So which aliyah do we do it in? So he says, Yesh lachabrim hastarim oila revi, which makes sense, right? If we're doing 7, so what is the middle aliyah? Is the 4th aliyah. 3 in the first parsha, 3 in the last parsha, and the 4th aliyah should be the one that combines the 2 parshas. So if one goes to shul this Shabbos, and you're going to be paying attention, like we said, we're supposed to pay attention to the Torah reading, is you're going to recognize that the 2 parshas combine on the 4th reading. All right, so he says, he brings, this is, the source of this is the Taz. Now, we have different times of the year that we read certain critical parts of the Torah. For instance, we have what's known as the klalos. Literally means the curses. We have the curses twice in the Torah. Once we're going to have it soon before Shavuos, in a few weeks, the Parshas Kehilchathah, and we have it before Rosh Hashanah. Specifically, the Rambam says it's the minhag that before Shavuos we always read the klalos in Torah's Kohanim, which is Vayikra, and we always read Mishnah Torah, the ones that Moshe repeated before his passing, before Rosh Hashanah, for a reason, because before these 2 great holidays, we should kind of, clear our minds, so to say. So the klalos have to be read in Parshas Bechukosai and Parshas Kisavai. The 2 places that we read the curses is in Bechukosai, which is the last parsha of Vayikra, and Parshas Kisavai, which is one of the last parshas of the Torah. So he says, Ein mafsikim beinehem. Although the curses are long, not as the second ones are much longer than the first ones, but still they're long reading. So you don't stop in between. You don't, let's say, cut halfway through and give 2 people the aliyah of the curses. The curses you're supposed to be read in one aliyah. The custom is, of course, that we don't call anyone up for the curses because it's not a kind of aliyah that you want to give anyone. to be the one who's standing there when the Torah is talking about all the horrible things that can happen and did happen over our history. So the custom is the Balkora, the one who's reading is the one who takes that aliyah. And we don't call him up even, he just makes the blessings. And also the custom is not to just start with the curses, but give a little, let's start with something positive. So at least one verse before. Okay, today the Shulchan Aruch is going into the laws of how things are. Today already the aliyahs are divided specifically. The Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi, it means besides, unless you add aliyot, we have everyone agrees where most people, there are certain places where certain customs are to stop in a certain place or other places, but pretty much we all agree where the aliyahs begin and end. But here's kind of, if you're just dividing it by 7, make sure to give at least one verse before the curses start. In order to not start a new chapter less than 3 verses, that's also a concept. So therefore, better to start 3 verses before. Means there's 2 ideas here. One is to never just, if you have the parakim, the chapters are divided in, that's not the Jewish chapters, but the actual what we call parshas in the Torah is whenever you see a pei or a samach. Pei means pasuach. That means that in the actual Torah, if one were to look into the actual scroll, you would see that there's a little separation between subject and subject. It's called parsha. So between the parshios, sometimes there's sasim. If there's a samach, it's in the chumash, means it goes right into it. But the Torah was given parsha, meaning this is something I think some people that may not be aware of. A lot of what we have today, the divisions of the Torah, chapter 21, chapter 22, that didn't come with the Jewish people. That came after Christianity. That's coming from, I don't want to get into details because I'm not 100% clear, but I understand, if I stand correctly, that came from the church. So the actual, what we know as the divisions of the parshas, the subjects of the Torah, is the way it's given in the Torah in the pei or the samach. But when you say chapter 21, chapter 22, the chapters themselves, today it's been adopted by the Jewish people, but the chapters were not part of the Torah from the Jewish perspective. And we're not saying no one's against it because everyone uses it till today. We say chapter 1, chapter 2, but I think the chapters were introduced was not introduced by the Jews. So when it says the parsha, so you shouldn't start a parsha with less than 3 verses. So because the klal the curses start a new parsha. So even though if it could be in the same chapter, parsha is not chapter. Parsha means the subjects as the Torah separates them. Chapters is what again came from the church. So you have to give 3 psukim. So we want 1 pasuk, 1 verse. So we shouldn't start with the curses, and then we don't want to have a parsha to be less. So you have to always have at least 3 psukim before we start the curses. Okay. Therefore, one should start 3 verses. Now the psukim, the verses is from the Torah, it's the chapters that are not from Jewish tradition. And also we don't just complete the aliyah with the curses. We should have at least 1 verse that's after the curses. The idea basically is we shouldn't only read negativity. So that's why, again, we don't give the aliyah to anyone, just the one who reads the Torah takes that aliyah, but even that person should at least have some positive in the reading. Also, because we're starting a new chapter, a new parsha, so you shouldn't just read 1, so read 3. So we have 3 before and 3 after. That's the bottom line. Okay. Ayin Le'il Siman Beis Chaf Aleph Chaf Beis. Yes.
Can you just remind us what the curses actually say?
What? Sorry?
Could you just remind us? I mean, we read it every year, but remind me what the curses are.
The curses are the part of the Torah where Moshe Rabbeinu in a few weeks from now is where God, so to say, there's the curses where God says, if you're not going to keep the Torah, what's going to happen? If you're going to keep my commandments, you get the blessings. If you don't keep the Torah, you're going to get the curses. And again, in Devarim, it's more intense, but basically, all the things that happen in our history, the exiles, the destruction, the murders, the things that even happen in October 7th, these are things that if one looks in the curses, they're pretty much described there, what's going to happen if people don't follow the Torah. Okay.
Thank you.
Now, another part of the Torah that has, let's call it a negative reading, is we read it a few months ago, is Parshas Kisisa. Parshas Kisisa is when we read about the golden calf. Now, those who paid attention, the Parshas Kisisa is a long parsha. The first two aliyot are very long, and then they become short. The second aliyah is very long because it's the whole story of the golden calf in one aliyah. So it's a long parsha. It's a long aliyah. So he says in Parsha Kisisa, im halevi kol parsegel. The custom is that the Levite, which I'm a Levite, so the second aliyah is the one where we read about the golden calf. Ad Misharsa Yeshua, until we come to the positive where Moshe came down and from the mountain that Joshua was with Moshe at all times. Okay, so that's like a positive. Vatam, why is the custom that the Levite gets this aliyah of the Torah, this reading of the Torah is specifically given to the Levite? There's a reason for it. Again, when you read negative in the Torah, so a person who gets that aliyah, that's why we don't want to give the curses to people, is it's kind of, you're calling up a person on a horrible story. A person doesn't want to be called up to the Torah for that story. But the Levite has nothing to be ashamed about, because there was not one Levite that participated in the golden calf. The Levites were not part of the golden calf. That's what Moshe said, who's with me? The whole tribe of Levi came. Because not one of the Levites were, you have to remember, there's a reason for that. The Levites were, from the Rambam, it seems that it was almost like there was like almost the division between the rest of the Jews and the Levites was very, very, very clear. And even in the 210 years they were in Egypt, the Levites weren't enslaved. Because they never joined Paro. So they always stayed, they always learned. They were never part of slavery. Moshe Rabbeinu, Aaron, they were never slaves. So the tribe of Levi were never slaves. They always kept to the Torah. They always stayed in yeshiva. The rest of the Jewish people, the rest of the Bnei Yisrael, they assimilated. And besides a few things that they kept very strong, they served idols. So it was only like the tribe of Levi that kept the tradition of our fathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. And that remained again when it came to the time of the golden calf. They weren't involved in that. They never had, so to say, the taste of idol worship, where the other Jews possibly did. So he says, the Levites were not part of the idol worship of the golden calf. And another thing he says, the custom is that this applies also to the curses, that when we read negative things, we don't read it loud. You read it in a lower voice, not too low. When I became bar mitzvah, so my father wanted me to learn how to read the Torah. So he gave me a few incentives to prepare. It was very hard in the first years. I was just 13. It takes you a whole year to learn your first parsha. Then 2 weeks later they want you to read the next parsha. It's 2 weeks. So it took a lot of effort, but it was worth it because I'm not an expert reader, but if I have to, I can. And so I remember I read the Torah, then the curses. And I read it fast, and the people in the shul complained. Says, the Balkor is reading it fast and low. So, but there's a reason for it, because when it comes to the negative, we read it b'kol namach. So if someone's going to be in the synagogue in a few weeks, and here the one reading the curses read it low and fast, there's a reason. Min vayiten al Moshe kechalois ad veichal Moshe. The part that you read low is from the story beginning until the story ends, which is, he quotes the verses where we start and where we end. And when you start Vaychal Moshe, where Moshe starts to pray to God that there should be tshuva, that God should forgive the Jewish people. Then you read then you start reading it again loudly. Ad v'yifin Moshe, until Moshe came down from the mountain. So then, because we're starting with tshuva, repentance and strength, so we start. And when again Moshe goes down to speak to the Jewish people, again you start reading it in a low voice. Until after, means there's two parts. There's the part where when God tells Moshe, before he even goes down, God tells Moshe, Lech, Reid, your people sinned. So right away Moshe starts to pray. So right away in the prayer, we go up in voice, but then we come down and Moshe actually deals with the Jewish people, punishes them, the tribe of Levi, kills a few of them. So when all that negative happens, so again, we read low, and then when it talks about afterwards, Moshe kind of was disappointed with the Jewish people. He moved his tent, right? Everyone remembers he moved his tent out of the camp. So when we go to the part that Moshe moved his tent, then we go back to regular reading. You read the rest in a high voice. Again, not shouting, but regular voice, let's say. Like I said before, also the curses are to be read in a low voice. Again, these are all customs that are part of the Torah reading. But when in middle of the curses, God says, and I'm going to remember the covenant I made with Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So remember, that's positive. So then again, we read it loud. But then we continue to when we get back to the negative, we read it low. And when we continue with the negative, so when anything that's negative, bad, not nothing to be proud of, we read low. And then when it says that God's going to take the Jewish people out and not destroy them, again, we lift our voice up. The idea basically is that when you read the Torah, you're not just supposed to be lifeless. When you read the Torah, you should be experiencing the stories that you're learning in the Torah. So if you're learning something positive, you read it loud. If you're reading something negative, you kind of go fast. And in Parshas Kisavai, when we read about the curses, also, once we complete the curses, we go into a higher voice. And then again, if it's negative, we read it in a low voice. He's just giving us the specific locations of where we go high and low. Sorry, okay, this is different places where we go high tone, low tone, fast, etc. Depending on what we're reading. Here's another thing that after Shavuos, when we're going to read Parshas Baloscha, we start with the Jewish people complaining. So when the people start to complain, the complaining part, so we read low and fast the curses. We read low and fast the idol worship, the golden calf. And also when the Jewish people complained, when they complained, we also has nothing to be proud about complaining. So we read that low as well. Vatam. And why do we read it low in that part? To show that we're not proud of our complaining and we regret that we complained. But here, when we say you're supposed to read it low, doesn't mean whisper it that no one could hear. The people should hear it, but in a lower tone. But if they're not going to read it, if no one hears it, then they're not going to fulfill the obligation of listening to the Torah. So you have to read it loud enough for people to listen. At the same time, it should be in a low voice, so it shouldn't show that you should show your, so to say, our regret and this and mourning of depending on the subject. This is also not everyone keeps this, but this is the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch says that in the end of Bamidbar, when we read about the 42 travels of the Jewish people, all 42 travels should be read in one aliyah. Shehem Neged Shem Membeis, because this is the Magen Avram says that this is corresponding to the name of God. 42 is the name of what's called the Ana B'Koach. If you look at the Ana B'Koach, which is we read now a lot of times in our prayers. So each one of the Ana B'Koach is 6 times 7. Okay. Yes.
So how do you have enough aliyahs if you say that all in one?
Because there's other subjects that we read about. There's plenty of there's questions just where you start and where you finish. Okay, let's just see if there's any of the footnotes that we want to add in over here. So these are just references of the places. Okay, what are we talking about here? Yes, so we read it without interruption. Okay, we read the curses. We don't divide the curses into two aliyot. I'll try to read this without my eyesight going. In Maseches Megillah, interpreting would make it, interrupting, sorry, would make it appear as though we do not wish to accept divine admonishment. So if we're going to divide in the middle of the curses, we're going to say as if, we don't like, we're disappointed in God giving us admonishment. The Elif Lecha, okay, he says, Shulchan Aruch rules that not interrupting the curses containing the Kitzure is a custom, and not interrupting B'chkaisa is halacha. Okay, this is just an interesting point, that in Kitzure, which is very long, it's a minhag, it's a custom not to divide. But in the first curses, which is in a few weeks from now, Parsh B'chkaisa, that's the law. We're not supposed to interrupt it. The difference is really that the first curses were said by God, so to say. The second curses were said by Moses. Okay. Okay, so sorry. 11 is okay, 12, also footnote 13 is a reference. 14 is a reference. 15 is the reference. Sorry about that. 16, okay, is also 17, 18, 19. What do we have? 20 over here, 20, 22. Okay, let's go back to 21 a second. Okay, 22 is that, what we said about the 42 travels should not be interrupted. The Magen Avram, this is the opinion of the Magen Avram, the Tzror HaMor and the Tzror HaMor, I guess. We also do not interrupt during the last 8 verses of the Torah. In the Torah, nor the 10 Commandments in Yisrael, and in Veschanan, nor during Az Yashir. Okay, so other places that we don't interrupt is we don't interrupt the song, Az Yashir, the 10 Commandments, the last 8 verses of the Torah read all in one. One of Holy God's names is the number 42. Okay, let's continue. Now, this is a law that applies to Aaron, right? Aaron, you said you're the Gabai's helper by the Torah reading. So it says, Ben Gavra leGavra Tzricha legal as a Sefer Torah. We don't leave the Sefer Torah open between aliyot. We close the Torah. Again, how people actually make the blessing is different customs. For instance, the Chabad custom is that we kiss the beginning and the end, and we close the Sefer Torah when we read. Others have the custom to leave the Sefer Torah open when they read the blessing. But here, when we finish between person to person who gets the aliyah, you must roll the Torah up and close it. But you don't have to cover it if you're just going to go right on to the next aliyah. But however, when we say the maftir, before maftir, when we read the last final verses before the haftorah, when we say kaddish before then, so then you do have to cover it. We take the covering of the Torah, and that's why the custom is that before kaddish we cover the Sefer Torah. Also, this is where a lot of times, if you're calling up a groom and people sing Mazel Tov and everything, you cover the Sefer Torah because it's going to be a while. And that's the custom also. When we say the Misha Berach, the blessings, we bless the person, especially some customs in the shul have many blessings. You bless the whole family, bless people in the shul, especially if you bless people that are ill. So anytime we're taking up time between aliyahs, it's not respectful to leave the Torah uncovered. We cover the Torah, especially the custom that people have of throwing sweets or nuts at the chassan or the bar mitzvah boy. It's totally, you have to make sure to cover the Torah, Aaron, if that's your job, because we don't want the Torah to get, God forbid, hit. It's not respectful.
And they say all the Mishnah bearers for all the people that the guy wants. Plus, they ask for a donation. They don't really ask; people give.
Yeah, they give a donation. So that all that's done, we cover the Sefer Torah. Okay. Im to b'Shabbos v'kar mashishi at Gemara Sidra. Now we're just going to go through a few laws of about mistakes. By the way, when I got my smicha back in 1997, it's eons ago. So one of the traditionally to get your smicha, you learn there's different material that you learn. Mostly deals with the laws of kosher, because back in the day, that was one of the main questions a rabbi had to know. Today, you have the institutions, the kosher symbol. If you go into a supermarket and it says this meat is stamped kosher, so pretty much you could buy it. But back in the day, people had either they slaughtered themselves, so they hired a shochet to come to their backyard and take one of their animals and prepare it for food. There were many questions that arose, and those questions had to be dealt with by the rabbi. So the laws of koshering, of kashrus, was usually one of the main things that are things that you have to know all the time. So to get smicha today, one of the things that people have to know are all around the laws of koshering, whether it's salting the meat or meat and milk and all that stuff, all the questions that could come while things are happening in your house. Other people add also the laws of Shabbos. The person who ran our institute wanted us to also know the laws of the Sefer Torah, because he said that's something that you know everyone's waiting. Like if there's a question what you're supposed to do during the Torah reading, you can't just start grabbing books. It's Shabbos, you can't Google it, right? You have to know the law on the spot. If everyone has to wait for you to figure out the law, so then you're making it's uncomfortable for the community. So he asked us to learn the laws of Torah Sefer Torah if there's a mistake in the Torah. Okay, means if there's something wrong with the Sefer Torah scroll, if it has something that would require maybe to change the Torah, etc. Okay. Im Tov b'Shabbos, what happens if you made a mistake? And you read at the sixth aliyah, again, we said minimum is 7. So at the sixth aliyah, you went all the way to the end. So now there's nothing left to read, and you only called up 6 men. Im Tov b'Shabbos v'kari mashisha ad gemar siddur. What happens if you called up 6 people only and you finished the parsha? So you again, the way we do it on Shabbos is you call 7 people up, you say Kaddish, then we read. We're going to learn later why we read. We read again, we repeat a final few verses called Maftir, which is part of the person who reads the Haftorah, or is called up to read the Haftorah. And the reason we do that is to connect the Torah to the Navi. But as far as completing the parsha, we completed it already. So you say Kaddish. Kaddish is something we say when we complete something. So you say the Kaddish when you completed the 7 people minimum that you have to call up. So when we completed the 7 people, you say Kaddish. But what happens if you only called 6 people and you completed the Torah? So he says, Lo Yemer Kaddish. You don't say Kaddish after the 6 people. Eli Yikram Yad is the Maftir call. In this case, it's going to be the 7th person to the Maftir, which is again the part that we read again. I mean, anyone who's going, just for those who are not familiar, you go to Shul and you see the Chazan is reading the Torah. So on Shabbos, it will be 7 people minimum called up. They'll finish the reading, say Kaddish, call up a person for Maftir, which is the person who says the Haftorah in some shuls, or is the one who's honored with the Haftorah. Maybe he'll have someone read it for him, and then they'll repeat the final 3 or 4 verses of the Torah. Will repeat it and read it again. So that's the usual custom. Say Kaddish first and then Maftir. But if you only call it 6 people, he says, Lo Yemer Kaddish, don't say the Kaddish. Eli Yikram Yadis Maftir, read the Maftir. So you called up your 7th person. V'yashtem Gam Minyan Shiva Kruyim, and then you have the 7 people that were called up. So when would you say the Kaddish then? So first you make the blessings, say the Navi, the part of the Haftorah that we read, and then you would say the Kaddish. Okay. In general, the custom is that when we learn, so a lot of people have the custom, we say a Mishnah, we say Kaddish afterwards. So when we learn Torah, we say Kaddish afterwards. So here he's saying they'll say the Kaddish only after the Haftorah. Same thing would apply in Yom Tiv. Im Tov v'kari Meraviad Gemar. Yom Tiv on the holidays, we don't call up 6 people. Those who were Shul now Pesach will recognize that we called 5 people up. But let's say by mistake you only called 4 people up. It means you finished the parsha after 4 people. Is Lo Yamar Kaddish, again, don't say the Kaddish after the 4th person. El Yikra Miyad is the Maftir. Read the Maftir, which is in the holiday. It's a bigger difference, because in the holiday the Maftir is not a repeat of the Torah. It's a special reading for the holiday. The Sefer Torah Sheni, that's why we bring out 2 Torahs on holiday. One is the reading we do for the part of the day of the holiday, and then we read the sacrifice, the Musaf. So in the second Sefer Torah, you'd first call up the person from after, read from the second Sefer Torah if your shul has 2 Torahs. V'achar Haftorah, v'habrachas, again, only after you say the Haftorah. Means after Maftir, you read the Haftorah and the brachas, you would say Kaddish. And he gives a reference to this in Siman Reish Pei Beis in chapter 282. Okay, just the footnotes on this. He says, okay, what's the source that you call up a person from after the 6th or the 4th Aliyah, if it's Shabbos or Yom Tiv, and only make the Kaddish after Haftorah? So he says, footnote number 25, the Mishnah Brura says that if Kaddish has not yet yet said, the seventh person is called, and a portion is repeated for him, then the maftir is called up. So he says that if you didn't do Kaddish yet, so obviously you're not supposed to do Kaddish, then you basically says that the seventh person is called up, a portion is repeated for him, and then maftir is called up. It means he still holds that you call up 8 people. So the Kitzur doesn't quote what the Chafetz Chaim says, what the Mishnah Berurah says, but the Mishnah Berurah says that you should call up a seventh person and then an 8th person. Okay. I don't think there's a footnote number 26. Next law. It says like this. What is the rule of the situation? This could happen many times, where we have to take out 3 Torahs. Again, when do we take out 3 Torahs? When there's 3 events happening at the same time. For instance, Shabbos Chanukah. If Shabbos Chanukah is Rosh Chodesh, so you have the week, the portion of the week, you have the portion for Rosh Chodesh, and you have the portion that we read for Chanukah. Or if one of the four special parshas come up, for instance, let's say Shabbos Shkolim, when we read about the coins that we have to give before Passover, so we have to read the parsha, then we have to read about the coins, and then we have to read, if it's Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, we have to read Rosh Chodesh. Same thing could happen on Shabbos HaChodesh. So there are a few times of the year that's possible that we would have to take out 3 Torahs. Not every year does this happen, but when it does happen, when we have to bring out 3 Torahs. However, the shul doesn't have 3 Torahs. Not every shul is blessed to have 3 Torahs. A lot of the large shuls today have many Torahs, but some shuls only are struggling with 1 Sefer Torah. So but the shul only has 2 Torahs. So which one? So you have 3 readings, right? And if you have 3 readings, you're gonna have to move 1 Torah afterwards to what's called the Galgal. You're gonna have to have a team of people come and move the Torah to a new reading, right? So which one do you move? It means you have 2 Torahs and 3 readings. So you have 2 options. You could read let's say the parsha on the first Torah, and then afterwards roll that first Torah to the second reading, and read the first Torah 2 readings, and then bring out the second Torah for the 3rd reading. Or you could bring the first Torah for the first reading, do Hagbah, put that away, this first Torah, put it to the side, and then bring the second Torah, read the second reading, and then roll it to the 3rd reading. So which one should you do? So he says like this, if you have to bring out 3 Torahs, but you only have, the shul only is blessed with 2 Torahs, so what he says, what you should do is that you shouldn't take the second Torah and read what you have to read the 3rd time, but you should take the first Torah to read it. Seemingly what he's saying is that the first Torah should be brought back for the 3rd reading. I don't believe that's our custom. And unless I'm misunderstanding him, see the English here. But rather, the first sefer should be taken for the reading of that portion. That portion doesn't say what that portion is, but I'm assuming he means the 3rd portion. But I don't believe that's the custom. I have never seen that done before. That we take the first Torah for the 3rd reading. Okay. Seems like that's what he means, but I'm not sure that's our custom. Yes, Aaron. I don't hear you. No, I cannot hear you.
What? You hear me now?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So when okay. You hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, here it is. Okay. When you when Chabad goes to a remote place to service the Jews, do they try to take 3 Torahs?
No. I mean, I never. I mean, maybe if you. I've never. I can't comment 100% on that, but I'm not sure people would take. It's not it's a big deal to move a Torah. We don't just like to move a Torah. It's not so simple to move a Torah. There's some opinions you have to read 3 readings you can't just move it for 1 reading. Again, there's not just Chabad. There's many situations where a person has a Shabbaton that you move a Torah. Let's say people go out to the mountains for Shabbos and you want to have a Torah. So it's not so simple to move a Torah. Torah is not just something like God forbid lahavdil sukkah, you just move around. It's something very sacred. It has to be kept in a sacred way. To move around isn't simple. I'm not familiar that they would move specifically 3 Torahs. I guess it all depends on how it's being moved, where it's being moved, etc. But and the circumstances of all that. But if there's no other way, then you would have one Sefer Torah.
Okay, so now my question is that okay? So you have 3 Sefer Torahs, you read 3 different sections, but you're supposed to raise the Torah 3 different times. If you have 3 Torahs, how do you raise it? Do the whole thing for the 3 readings?
So that's what I'm saying. So if you're going to, let's just say this scenario happens more often, right? You have many times that we have to read 2 times, and Yeshua only has 1 Torah. That's a more common occurrence where you have. There's many times of the year that you do. There could be many years. I don't know the statistics of it, but I think it's possible to have more than 1 year at a time where you don't have 3 readings. Because again, the situation where you would need 3 Torahs could only be when there is holiday, Shabbos, and Rosh Chodesh, and that only the chances of that are only 3 times a year: Shabbos Chanukah, Shabbos Shkolim, and Shabbos HaChodesh. It happens sometimes, but I don't think, and again, it depends on the calendar. But the idea that those out of 52 weeks, that 3 of them would fall out on Shabbos is not so common. But what happens all the time is the 2 readings where you have Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh, or you have Shabbos and Yom Tov. That happens all the time. So you do not do Hagbah on the first Torah. You only do Hagbah when you complete. That's what I'm saying. I find it interesting that he says about in law number 7 to use the first Torah for the 3rd reading, because in that case you did do Hagbah and you'd bring the Torah back. But a very good question, Aaron. Okay, now let's do one more law and then we'll open for questions before we end the class. Again, but I was considering of not learning these 2 chapters. I think it's chapter 70,
Oh, it's very good.
79, but because maybe it's not applicable to everyone. But we're going to continue going through it. Yes, Barbara.
I was just going to say, I'm glad you did go over these because it explains what I have observed in shul. And now I understand what's going on. Instead of just all the commotion, I understand.
Now you understand the commotion. Yeah. Thank you. Excellent. Okay, now we have the big problem. Again, this is all what we've learned until now is the basic laws. A few mistakes. The Baal Korah went from instead of overshot the exit, and instead of finishing at 6, the 6th Aliyah middle went 6 all the way to the end. But in a regular situation, what do you do if there's a mistake? That happens all the time, especially you have old shuls with old Torahs. We grew up in Seattle. Again, we grew up in I don't know, Barbara, it's how many Torahs you have in your shul, Rebecca and Ariel and all you guys in the East Coast.
We got so many Torahs.
Yeah, are blessed with many Torahs. But in the Chabad house, we grew up with 1 Torah. And that Torah it wasn't written for us. It was a hand me down one, and that means they're old and there are a lot of mistakes and a lot of the ink going out and all these kind of things. So we had many cases where my uncle who's an excellent Torah reader, Rabbi Kornfeld, would find a mistake, and there's different ways of dealing with the mistake. And like I said before, my rabbi who I got smicha from wanted us to be experts in these laws, not that I remember them, it's been a long time, but because that could happen, and it did happen when we were growing up. Okay, let's say that Sefer Torah has to be written in a certain way, and it's possible over the years with the rolling and unrolling, ink falls off, right? So today they have all ways of checking the Torahs. Today, I believe, I know that they have computers that check the Torahs and the tefillin and mezuzah because sometimes the eye is not as sharp as the computer. Okay, but let's say that all that didn't happen for whatever reason. The Sefer Torah is you find that there's a defect in the Torah, and it's no longer kosher. So in Isbar Hadinim B'Simin Chavdal, those laws in the details is not connected to Shabbos specifically, and therefore those laws are covered in chapter number 24. One could look at it on their own. However, he says like this: I'm not sure how this scenario works. This scenario could only work if there's 2 Torahs. But let's say, or the Baal Korah overlooked it. But let's say you found the defect only in the maftir reading. Again, the maftir reading is after we've read 7 or 5 times, depending on if it's a holiday or the Shabbos. We read again. If it's Shabbos, not Rosh Chodesh or Yom Tif, we read the maftir. We repeat some of the verses that we read at the end of the 7th reading, and that's connected to the person who gets called up for the Haftorah. So let's say you find a puzzle in maftir. Now, if you find puzzle maftir in the second Torah, then this law makes more sense. The first, if it's on a Shabbos, that would be that one of 2 ways. One is that the person who is reading didn't notice the mistake the first time you read it, because on a regular Shabbos, you're just repeating what you read. So if there's a mistake, you would have seen it the first time. But for whatever reason, you only found it the second time. Or for some weird way, the defect happened only after you read 7 times, or whatever that would be. Is imhu maftir shachayves hayayim. If it's a maftir that's part of the obligation of the day, meaning like a holiday or a Rosh Chodesh, that's a special reading that we have to read for that day, not just to repeat a few verses to connect it to the Haftorah. Kigoyin, for instance, what would be a case there's a chayvas hayayim? It's obligatory. Is if it's a holiday or Shabbos or Chodesh, basically cases where you have a second Torah for the second reading connected to maftir, or in the case of Shkolim, which is the 4 parshas that we read around Purim and Pesach, Ukadayim, etc., or Chanukah, etc. Shemight seem Sefer Torah Achil Maftir, i.e., the point is that there's a second Torah for the maftir reading. Az dinay k'moy parsha acheres. Then it's like any other situation where there's a problem in the Torah. Means you need to read this part because it's part of Chavas Hayom, and there's a problem. So then look in chapter number 24, what we do in such a case. However, on a regular Shabbos, again, this law to me something's missing in my knowledge of this law. Aval b'Shabbos, that's it. This happens on a regular Shabbos, meaning that the maftir is only repeating what you read before. So that you're only repeating part of the verses of the 7th reading. The only reason we're doing this 8th reading is to give respect to the Torah, that we're not reading the Haftorah, the part of the prophets separately, but we want to elevate, so to say, that even the written Torah, meaning the 5 books of Moses, is part of the Haftorah. That's the maftir connected to the Haftorah. Like he says in the parentheses, we shouldn't say that there's it's all equal. There's reading of the Torah, there's reading of the prophets. So to make it not equal, so therefore even when we read the prophets, we first have to read the Torah. Therefore, we read first the Torah before we read the prophets. One would think it's all the same thing. We make blessings before the Torah, we make blessings before the Haftorah. So it's all equal. So again, there are some customs that people read the Haftorah out of a scroll, but even that scroll is not the same scroll as a Torah. It doesn't have the same sanctity as a Torah scroll. That's not a custom that you see that often outside of Eretz Yisrael. But in Eretz Yisrael, usually a lot of places, not in Chabad, but in other places, they have a special scroll for the Haftarah.
Some have Sephardics do it.
And therefore, the person who gets that aliyah usually has to know how to read it as well, because there's no nikudot, there's no yes. Shireen, you want to ask something?
I know I did have a question on when it because I know in the shore I was going to they had 3 of the Torah, so but on the special with the holiday, they another one. So I just had the question on with because there's always it's only certain ones to read the Torah.
Say that again.
And first yeah, that's
I mean, we have sometimes that we read 3 Torahs. It's not often. You would have noticed it a few times. My memories serves me right. I think we've done it this year. We do read Sefer Torahs 3 times sometimes, but usually we'll have 1 time on a regular Shabbos, 2 times if it's a holiday.
Yeah, we had a 3, I remember.
Yeah, we did have a 3, I think.
Because I'm the one who covers it, so I'm always counting.
Yeah, you're the one counting him. Okay, so the point's like this. On a regular Shabbos, the only reason we read the Torah before the Haftorah is just to show that this Torah reading is more elevated than the Haftorah reading, which is just reading the prophets. So therefore, that's what he's saying in the parentheses. Therefore, even the Haftorah should start with maftir, with reading from the Torah. To show that the main part is to read from the Torah. Again, the reason why we have this custom, obviously, everything's divine. But the reason technically why we have this idea of reading from the prophets at the end of every Torah reading on a holiday is because I think it was in Roman times, they forbade reading from the Torah. So in order to read something, they read from the prophets. But once that decree was nullified, it obviously divine God wanted it to be that way. So that was kept, that we always read the Haftorah out after the reading of the Torah. But now he's like this. But the point is, that what happens if you find a mistake on a regular Shabbos reading from the same Torah you read the first 7 readings? So if you find the mistake because you really completed your obligation of reading 7 readings, and you don't have an obligation to read this 8th reading for a holiday. It's just to give respect to the Torah. So if you find the mistake, you just continue reading. What's the obvious question? Obvious question is that unless that mistake was created after the 7 readings, the fact that you found the mistake now means you didn't read the 7th Aliyah properly, so you didn't read properly. But it doesn't work like that. Once you've passed the 7th Aliyah, you passed it, even though the mistake was there from before. And the Goyrim b'Sefer Torah, you finish the Torah. But you don't make a blessing because now we know that the Torah is not kosher; it has to be fixed. But you still say the Haftarah with the blessings. What happens? The Balkora, again, this has to be a situation where the person who reads the Torah didn't notice it the first time, unless some miraculous way it happened afterwards. So, but let's say the person opens the Torah before they even make the blessings, he notices, oh, there's a mistake. So what happens then? Then in that case, he says, do bring out a second Sefer Torah, even though it's only because here you didn't even make a blessing yet, so you have to have the Haftarah reading. So in the case where you made a blessing before, again, what seems from this is, and this is in the laws and the mistakes of Sefer Torah, is that although retroactively, I mean, you could call foul, how far back do you go? It's not just this week. If you're reading from the same Torah, let's say the mistake is at the end of the Torah. You read an entire year from this Torah. The mistake was there always. We don't know when the mistake happened. Again, there's 2 ways a mistake happens in the Torah. One is it wasn't written properly in the first place and no one caught it. And the second is that it happened, let's say the ink dried out, right? So we definitely we don't go backwards. Whatever was covered was covered. So in the case over here, the fact that we read 7 Aliyahs and that obviously the mistake was there in the 7th reading, you just didn't notice it. We don't say you have to start again from the 7th reading or start the whole parsha before. What was read was read. That's it. We don't go back, even though technically one could ask why, but we don't go back. But here it happened in the middle. So if you made the bracha before, we continue with the reading. And we just don't make a blessing. If you didn't make a blessing yet, so the Kitzur says, I would assume you take out another Sefer Torah. V'im ein Sefer Torah acher. So what happens if there is no Sefer Torah to take out? Az mishi yala b'achreina hu yem haftarah. So then you didn't have an aliyah because you didn't make the first blessing. You know it's a mistake. So the person who got the 7th reading, he already did 7 readings. So that person should read the Haftarah with the blessings. Imadayin le'amr kaddish. And what happens if you didn't say kaddish? So when would you say the kaddish? You don't say the Kaddish now after the 7th reading. You say it after the Haftarah because you want to combine the 7th Aliyah to the Haftarah. Okay. This is why the person who gave me smicha said that you need to know the laws of Sefer Torah to be a rabbi, because these mistakes happen all the time. I grew up, these mistakes were happening all the time. Again, especially if you're like in my father's shul in the beginning, where they didn't have a new Torah written, which is fresh and clean and checked. There was an old Torah that things could happen to old Torahs and old scrolls. And there were many times that my uncle would call up and say, we have a problem here. Yes, Aaron.
So I'm going to give you this example with my tefillin. But then, okay. So I asked, my father-in-law was going to Israel when I first was dating my wife and anything. She says, anything you want. I was becoming religious before I knew her, but that's not the point. So I asked him, I want tefillin from Israel. So he got me a pair of tefillin. Many years later, we're married, everything's good. I'm studying with a Chabad guy, and then we get to the section about tefillin. I need to fix it. It can easily be fixed. So it was a Chabad guy I was learning with just because it was my friend. We went to the Chabad guy who fixes tefillins, and he said, it's not that there's anything wrong with the paper. It's just, are you Ashkenaz or Sephardic? I said, I'm Ashkenaz. He says, you need more crowns on your thing. So he wrote the crowns. I told him, go do whatever you have to do, make it Ashkenaz. But the thing is that I'm asking, let's say an Ashkenaz shul wants, or a Sephardic shul wants to be nice to another shul that's not their type. They want to donate a Torah.
No. That's not considered. If that's not considered a mistake, I'm not going to get into those laws. If you have a Sephardic Torah, you have that's written that we're not talking about such a scenario.
Well, they told me that it would be good if you had the crown, so I said, go ahead. You know, he's Chabad, he knows what he's talking about.
That's private. That's a private pair of tefillin. That's not about Sefer Torah. You don't go and change Sefer Torahs.
So even the extra letter.
Talking about a case where there's something actually halachically wrong with the Torah. That's not going to custom.
But then, now if you do find something wrong with it, you have to fix it eventually, or don't use it.
Again, the difference if you're using a Sephardic Sefer Torah.
No, I'm saying this. You just said if you've read. Okay, so I'm just asking another question. I got two questions. So now you said you passed it. You already read. You passed that part.
Of course. If you notice a mistake, you have to fix it. You can't read from that Torah anymore.
Right, but okay. So you just don't. You don't have to read.
You just don't. I mean, the question is, how far back do you go? If you find the mistake at the end of the Torah, right? Do you say that the whole year you didn't read the Torah?
Okay, but let's go with this story. So it takes time. You have to replace that whole page, right?
It depends. Again, we're not learning the laws.
Okay, fine. So just
depending on the mistake.
You only have one Torah, and let's say you find it, and there's not enough time to fix it before next Shabbos. What do you do?
You can't use the Torah. If it's a Torah is not kosher, it's not kosher. There's no getting around.
So it's better to have no Torah than to have a non-kosher.
It's not better. That's the law. It's not given to you as a choice.
So what do you do when you don't have a Torah?
If you don't have a Torah, you don't have a Torah. You have to figure it out. Today in 2025, there's many options. Back in the day, it was a problem. You're right. So hopefully, there's another synagogue that will loan you a Torah. Even in Seattle, let's say the Kehilchathah has many Torahs. In such a scenario, another shul that has more than one Torah would lend you the Torah. If you live in this community that there's absolutely no other Torahs, it's not kosher. It's still not an excuse. You can't take out a non-kosher Torah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, it's like this. The reading is stopped and resumed from another Sefer Torah. The concluding bracha is said on the second Sefer Torah. Again, if we change the Sefer Torah, you stop, put away the Torah, take out the next Sefer Torah, and you have to make the final blessing on the second Sefer Torah. Okay, 27 is just the reference. 28 is, okay, what's this case? If the first bracha was not said, then if the first bracha was not said, it would seem that we take out a second Sefer Torah. 28. According to the Magen Avram, Pri Megadim, and Derech HaChaim, another Sefer Torah is not taken out because it creates an inconvenience for the congregation. Instead, the maftir is read from the Torah without the brachot. So the maftir reads from the Torah without the brachot. So here's an opinion that according to the Magen Avram and others, if it's by the maftir, you find the mistake before the reading, so you just read it without the blessings. That is only that scenario. But again, to take out a non-kosher Sefer Torah initially, knowing it's not kosher before you fix it, we don't do that.
You're supposed to check the Torahs every year before you start the reading at the.
That I'm not sure how often you have to check. But listen, it happens all the time. There's two types of mistakes. There's a mistake that was always there, just not noticed, and there's mistakes that happen. Like if a letter's missing. Okay, I'm not getting into the spiritual, but if something is mamish not there, it was never there. If something was rubbed out, that's something else. If letters get rubbed out, that's another thing. But something that was written wrong in the first place, but we don't look at it that way. We don't say, oh, this Torah was never kosher. It's from when you find it. Going forward, it's a problem. And here, the Magen Avram says that if you read 7 callings, and the person opens the Torah and sees the 8th calling by this next reading, that there's something wrong before they even read it, So he says, don't take out another type for Torah. That's too inconvenient for the community. Just read it without the blessings, even though there's no blessings. You can't make a blessing because the Torah is not kosher. Roll it up, put it away like you would regularly, and then go to the Haftarah. All right, any other questions before we close this class? Again, these are the laws of again, everyone goes to shul, and unfortunately sometimes these things happen in a community, and there's different ways of dealing with it. Different shuls, have different expertise. Again, the good gabbai, and like Aaron asked, how many times do you check it? The good team in the synagogue that deals with synagogue things is supposed to be on top of it as best as you can. That to make there's a concept in halacha called tircha de tzibura, not to inconvenience the community. And in a situation, for instance, it's lazy if you go to a shul and the Sefer Torah that you take out is not in the proper place. Sometimes you come to a synagogue and they say, "Oh, the Torah is not in the right place." So mistakes happen. Or if you take out the wrong, you have many Torahs, you took out the wrong Torah. But the job of the gabbai and the shamash is the people that are the team that make sure that the shul should run orderly. Is one of their jobs is to make sure that before Shabbos or the holidays, the Torahs are in the right place. And when you open up the Torah, the community doesn't have to wait until you roll the Torahs. And there's other laws that are applied to this. We see the Magen Avram says about tircha de tzibura, at what length do we go not to inconvenience the community for things that are being held up for whether it's there's something that went wrong or something that wasn't done. So therefore, if you're in a shul and you see that everything is running smooth, don't take it for granted. There was a lot of effort put into it behind before the shul started, whether it's on Friday or what have you. But again, a person who does their job, the one who is in charge of doing these things, should have that all the Torahs are in the right place and the right time. So the time we come to the reading, everything should be properly done. All right, Laila Tov, everyone. Good Shabbos. Thank you for joining again. Thank you for the sponsors for this for tonight's